In this factoring methods video, we will learn about factoring out the GCF and then simplifying. This is a calculus level problem. Example 1. Factor and simplify. In parentheses, x to the 1/2 plus 1 times 1/2 times x to the minus 1/2. That product minus, in parentheses, x to the 1/2 minus 1 times 1/2 times x to the minus 1/2. Looking for the greatest common factor, they do not have x to the 1/2 plus 1 in common. The first product has that factor, but the second product has the factor x to the 1/2 minus 1, which is not the same. So the first thing we have in common in each of the products is the number 1/2. That's part of the GCF. The other factor they have in common is x to the negative 1/2. So we have factored out the GCF, which is 1/2 times x to the minus 1/2. Now I'm going to use brackets because both groups have a factor left over that is a binomial. And I'm going to be putting those leftover factors in parentheses. So for the first product, 2 out of 3 of the factors were part of the GCF, and what is left is x to the 1/2 plus 1. Now here, the parentheses are not necessary because if I drop them, I'd have the same thing. But in the second group, the parentheses are going to be important because we will need to distribute the subtraction. And the leftover factor from the second product is, in parentheses, x to the 1/2 minus 1. I'm going to rewrite the GCF, so 1/2 x to the minus 1/2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to simplify inside the brackets. So I'm dropping the parentheses around x to the 1/2 plus 1, but then I'm going to distribute the subtraction for the second group. So I get minus x to the 1/2 plus 1. Rewriting the GCF, 1/2 x to the minus 1/2. Now in the brackets we're going to add like terms. X to the 1/2. Subtract x to the 1/2 is 0. And positive 1 plus 1 is 2. So that whole factor in brackets simplifies to 2. And then we see that we do have one more thing we can do to simplify. Because we have a product, you can multiply in any order. And so I'm going to take 1/2 times 2, that's 1. And we're left with the factor x to the minus 1/2. I'm not writing the 1 because it's not necessary. Example 2 says factor and simplify. In parentheses, x to the 1/3 minus 2 times 1/3 times x to the negative 2/3 minus, in parentheses, x to the 1/3 plus 2 times 1/3 times x to the minus 2/3. The answer is negative 4/3 times x to the negative 2/3.